He was just a worn-out veteran walking home after a night shift in the rain when he saw a woman running for her life. No sirens, no screams, just calm men in the dark who didn't need to hurry because they never missed, and he had every reason to look away. No money, no power, no backup, but his German shepherd stopped, and so did he, because sometimes God doesn't send angels from the sky. He sends tired people with kind hearts, and one quiet decision to stay can become the miracle that saves a life. Stay with this story, and if you believe hope still exists, don't forget to subscribe. Rain pressed down on the city in a thin, relentless sheet, turning the streetlights into blurred halos and soaking the cracked pavement with the quiet persistence of something that had all night to wait. Jack Turner finished tightening the last conduit clamp with stiff, aching fingers and stepped back from the fuse box, exhaling through his nose. 48 years old, 5'11", built thick rather than tall, Jack's body carried the stubborn weight of a man who had worked with his hands for most of his life. His shoulders were broad but sloped slightly forward now, not from weakness but from years of carrying tool bags, ladders, and memories he never talked about. His face was square and weathered, framed by a salt-and-pepper beard he trimmed unevenly in the bathroom mirror of his rented room, and his dark hair, once black, was cut short more out of habit than fashion. Deep lines sat permanently between his brows, not anger lines, but the mark of someone who was always watching, always measuring risk, even when he told himself he was just fixing wires for overtime pay. Beside him, standing perfectly still despite the rain, was Rex. The German shepherd was 5 years old, large even for the breed, with a powerful chest and long, straight legs that made him look perpetually ready to move. His coat was a classic black and tan, darkened by rain until it shone like wet stone under the streetlight. Rex's ears were upright and alert, his amber eyes sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. He wore a simple, well-worn harness instead of a collar, the leather softened by years of use. Rex was not aggressive by nature, but there was a gravity to him, a quiet seriousness that came from having learned early that the world could turn dangerous without warning. Jack slung his tool bag over one shoulder, rolled his neck to ease the stiffness, and gave Rex a short nod. "Let's go," he said quietly. His voice was low and rough, not unfriendly, just unused to being raised. They started down the narrow side street toward the row of aging apartment buildings where Jack rented a single room on the second floor. The rain soaked through his jacket, but he barely noticed. Discomfort had long since stopped registering as something worth complaining about. He was thinking about nothing in particular, about the hum of electricity still echoing faintly in his ears, about whether the landlord would finally fix the broken heater, about how quiet the room would be when he got back. When Rex slowed. Not stopped, slowed. It was subtle, a shift in the dog's gait more than a visible movement. Rex's ears angled forward, his head lifting slightly, his body tensing just enough that Jack felt it through the leash before he consciously saw anything change. Jack's steps shortened, his hand tightening on the worn leather strap without thought. He did not feel fear. He felt focus. The rhythm of the street broke. A woman burst into view at the far end of the block, running hard. She was not running the way joggers ran or even the way drunks ran when they thought it was funny. She was running with the desperate, inefficient urgency of someone who knew she was out of time. She stumbled once, nearly went down, then caught herself and kept going, her breath coming in sharp, panicked bursts that Jack could hear even over the rain. She was in her early 30s, slim and slightly taller than average, with long chestnut hair that had come loose from a low professional knot and now clung wetly to her pale face. Her skin was smooth but drained of color, her lips parted as she gasped for air. She wore office clothes, a dark blazer, tailored slacks, practical shoes not meant for sprinting through puddles, and they were already smeared with grime along the hems. She did not belong on this street at night, and Jack saw that immediately, the same way he could spot a bad splice from across a room. Rex let out a low sound, not a growl, but something deeper and more restrained, a warning meant only for Jack. Jack's eyes followed the woman's line of movement, then flicked past her. 3 men moved through the rain behind her. They did not shout. They did not run wildly. They walked fast, evenly spaced, cutting through the street with deliberate calm. They wore dark jackets, plain enough to blend in but fitted in a way that suggested strength underneath. One of them was tall and lean, his hair cropped close to his scalp. Another was heavier through the shoulders, his beard trimmed short and neat. The third walked slightly behind, his gaze scanning doorways rather than the woman herself. Their faces were blank, their movements efficient, and Jack felt something cold settle in his gut. They were not chasing her in anger. They were collecting her. Jack stopped walking. For a moment, only a moment, he considered doing nothing. That was the instinct he had spent years teaching himself, the one that said it was safer not to see, not to get involved, not to open doors that led back to places he had barely escaped. He was tired. He was soaked. He was just a man trying to get home. Rex shifted closer to his leg, his body a solid, living presence, his attention fixed on the approaching figures. Jack stepped sideways into the shadow of a construction scaffold, pulling Rex with him. The woman was closer now, her eyes wild, her head turning as if she could not decide which direction offered the least danger. She did not see Jack until his hand closed gently but firmly around her forearm. She gasped, a sharp, terrified sound, her body twisting instinctively to pull away. "Quiet," Jack said, not loudly but with a weight in his voice that cut through panic. He guided her sideways, not into the open alley she was angling toward, but into a narrow pocket of darkness between stacked construction materials and a temporary barrier wall. Rex moved immediately, positioning himself to block the line of sight from the street, his broad body filling the gap without a sound. The woman's heart was hammering so hard Jack could feel it through her sleeve. She shook, her breath hitching, her eyes darting past him toward the street. Up close he could see the fine lines of strain at the corners of her eyes, the faint smudge of mascara beneath one lash, the way fear had sharpened her features into something almost brittle. "There," she whispered. "I know," Jack said. He did not look away from the street. "Stay still." The 3 men passed the mouth of the alley. Jack watched their shoes splash through shallow puddles, watched the tilt of the heavy man's head as he assessed the shadows without slowing. For one terrible second, Jack was certain the man would turn, would look directly at Rex's dark outline, would see the truth of what was hidden there. But they kept moving. Jack did not relax. He counted under his breath the way he always did. 1, 2, 3. He felt, more than heard, the moment the men reached the end of the block. He knew their kind. They did not give up. They recalculated. The woman zagged slightly against the barrier, her knees threatening to give way now that the immediate danger had passed. Jack shifted just enough to support her without pinning her, aware of how easily fear could tip into panic. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She swallowed hard. "Emily," she said. Her voice trembled, but there was clarity in it too, a stubborn thread of composure fighting to surface. Emily Carter. Jack nodded once, committing it to memory without knowing why. He looked down at her clothes, at the way the rain-soaked fabric clung to her, at the way she flinched every time a car passed at the end of the street. "You don't belong out here," he said, not accusingly, just stating a fact. Emily let out a breath that sounded dangerously close to a laugh. "I know." Jack glanced toward the street again. The rain had thickened, blurring the distance, but his instincts hummed with certainty. "They'll come back," he said. "Not right away, but they will." Emily's eyes widened. "I can't keep running." Jack felt the old weight press down on him then, the weight of every moment he had chosen not to step in, not to look, not to remember what it felt like to stand between danger and someone who couldn't stand alone. He looked at Rex, at the dog's steady stance, his unwavering focus. Jack had never thought of himself as brave. He had just learned over a lifetime of losses and small, quiet failures that some lines once crossed could not be uncrossed. "Come with me," he said. Emily hesitated, her gaze flicking between Jack's face and the darkness behind him. She took in his worn jacket, his calloused hands, the exhaustion etched into his features. He did not look like a savior. He looked like a man who was already tired, but he was still there. She nodded. Jack guided her deeper into the shadows, Rex falling into step at their side, silent and watchful. As they moved away from the street, Jack felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the knowledge that whatever came next would not be simple, would not be clean, would not end easily. But for the first time in a long while, he did not turn away. The garage sat at the edge of an industrial block the city had quietly forgotten. Squeezed between a closed auto parts store and a chain-link fence rusted into a permanent lean, its corrugated metal door scarred with dents and old graffiti half scrubbed by rain. Jack unlocked it with a key that stuck every time, the motion familiar enough that he didn't curse anymore. Inside, the air smelled of oil, wet concrete and cold metal, a scent that clung to clothes and never quite washed out. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead, flickering once before settling into a dull, uneven glow. There were no cameras, no internet, no comforts to speak of, just a battered workbench, shelves of mismatched tools, a narrow cot pushed against the back wall, and an old television perched on a milk crate like an afterthought. It wasn't a home. It was a place where Jack could exist without being asked questions. Emily hesitated just inside the doorway, her body rigid, her eyes scanning the shadows as if expecting hands to reach out from them. Up close, Jack could see how young she really was, early 30s at most, her face drawn tight by fear and exhaustion rather than age. Her chestnut hair hung damp and tangled over her shoulders, darker now from rain, and her skin had the pale translucence of someone who spent more time under office lights than sunlight. She hugged her arms around herself, fingers trembling, the adrenaline that had kept her upright finally draining away. "You can sit," Jack said, nodding toward a wooden crate near the heater he sometimes used when the nights dipped too cold. His tone was neutral, offering, not ordering. Emily lowered herself onto the crate with care, as if her legs might betray her if she moved too quickly. Only then did Jack notice the thin line of blood soaking through the fabric near her ankle, the dark red stark against the gray grime of the garage floor. She followed his gaze and winced. "I think I cut it when I fell," she said, her voice unsteady, embarrassed by the weakness creeping in now that she was no longer running. Jack set his tool bag down and reached into a dented metal cabinet bolted to the wall. Inside was a small first aid kit, cheap, incomplete, but enough. He crouched in front of her, movements slow and deliberate, the way he'd learned to move around frightened people who needed calm more than speed. Rex followed and positioned himself by the door, sitting squarely with his back straight and ears angled forward, his presence quiet but unmistakable. He didn't bare his teeth or growl. He just watched. Jack rolled up Emily's pant leg carefully. The cut was shallow but messy, bleeding more from abrasion than depth. He cleaned it with antiseptic, his hands rough but gentle, the touch of someone used to handling fragile things despite appearances. Emily sucked in a sharp breath at the sting, then forced herself to exhale. "You don't have to," she started. "I know," Jack said. "Hold still." She did. As he wrapped the bandage, Emily studied him in silence. Up close, she noticed the faint scar that disappeared into his beard along his jawline, the old one that had healed unevenly, and the way his eyes never quite softened even when his voice did. There was a distance in him, not coldness, but restraint, like a door kept closed because opening it took too much energy. When he finished, he stood and washed his hands at the utility sink, the water running brown for a moment before clearing. He turned back to her. "You hungry?" Emily shook her head automatically, then paused. "I don't think I could eat if I tried." Jack nodded, accepting that. He reached over and flicked the TV on. More for noise than information, something to fill the heavy quiet that followed trauma. The screen flickered, static snapping before settling into a local news broadcast. Emily stiffened immediately, her shoulders drawing up as if bracing for a blow. Jack saw it a second too late. The anchor's voice was grave, measured, the kind reserved for emergencies. A photo filled the screen, a professional headshot of Emily, her hair neatly styled, her expression composed and confident. Nothing like the woman sitting on the crate with rain-soaked clothes and shaking hands. Beneath it, a headline scrolled in bold red. Emily Carter, wanted for questioning in connection with the theft of sensitive national security data. Authorities advise the public not to approach. Emily made a small, broken sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob, and brought both hands to her mouth. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." The broadcast cut to a press conference. A man stepped up to the podium, tall and broad-shouldered, his blonde hair perfectly styled, his suit dark and expensive, tailored to project both authority and empathy. He was handsome in a polished, unapproachable way, with sharp cheekbones and a controlled smile that never quite reached his pale blue eyes. His posture was flawless, his hands steady as he gripped the sides of the podium. "This is a difficult time," he said, voice smooth and practiced. "Emily is a brilliant woman, but she's been under immense stress. We believe she may be experiencing a mental health crisis." Emily let out a strangled cry and turned away from the screen, pressing her forehead to her knees. "That's him," she said, her voice muffled. "Noah." Jack watched the man on the screen, taking in the details the way he always did. The confidence, the lack of hesitation, the ease with which he spoke about concern while carefully shifting blame. Noah Harrington, the ticker at the bottom read, "Tech entrepreneur, philanthropist, visionary." "My fiancé," Emily said hoarsely, lifting her head. Her eyes were wet, red-rimmed, but beneath the fear something sharper was emerging. Anger, betrayal. "He's rewriting me, making me look unstable so no one will question what happens when I disappear." Jack turned the volume down but didn't turn the TV off. He wanted to see the lie through to the end. He had seen men like Noah before. Not this one, not in this setting, but the type. Men who wore concern like armor and used it to crush anything inconvenient. Emily's shoulders shook as the truth finally spilled out of her. She told Jack how Noah had been charming, generous, endlessly supportive, how he'd encouraged her career, praised her intelligence, how she'd believed in him, believed they were building something meaningful together, and how, 3 days ago, that belief had shattered when she discovered what he was really doing. Jack listened without interrupting, leaning against the workbench, his arms crossed loosely over his chest. He didn't ask questions yet. He let her talk until the words slowed, until the tears came harder, the kind that came when safety finally allowed them. "He has money," Emily said, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "Lawyers, media, people who make problems go away. I ran because if I stayed, I wouldn't be here right now." Jack's jaw tightened, the muscle jumping once beneath his beard. He had no illusions about how the world worked when power decided something was expendable. Emily looked up at him, desperation flickering back into her eyes. "You shouldn't be involved in this. I'll leave. I don't want—" "No," Jack said quietly. She froze. He met her gaze steadily. "Not tonight." It wasn't a promise of salvation. It wasn't even a plan. It was just a boundary, drawn firm and simple. Tonight, you're here," he went on. "That's enough." The words seemed to hit her harder than anything else had. Emily sagged, her spine curling inward as if the fight had drained out of her all at once. She nodded, a small, helpless movement, and covered her face again as silent sobs shook her frame. Rex stood and crossed the concrete floor, slow and careful, stopping just short of her knees. He lowered himself and rested his chin lightly against her leg, warm and solid. Emily flinched at first, then hesitated, and finally let one hand drop into the thick fur along his neck. The dog didn't move, didn't demand anything, simply stayed. Jack watched the scene with a tightness in his chest he didn't bother naming. He turned the TV off, plunging the garage into a quieter, more honest silence broken only by the rain drumming on metal. Outside, somewhere beyond the thin walls, the city kept moving. Inside the garage, for the first time in hours, Emily Carter was no longer running. The rain thinned to a cold mist sometime after midnight, leaving the streets slick and reflective, the city quieter but no less watchful. Jack locked the garage door behind them and leaned his weight against it for a moment, listening. Nothing. Just the distant hiss of tires on wet asphalt and the low industrial hum he had grown used to over the years. Rex sat at his side, alert but calm, amber eyes following every shadow that moved across the narrow windows near the ceiling. Emily stood near the workbench, arms wrapped around herself, the warmth of safety beginning to fade into the heavier reality of what came next. She spoke without preamble, as if the words had been pressing against her ribs for hours and could no longer be contained. She told Jack about the defense AI system she had helped design, a targeting framework meant to reduce civilian casualties by improving identification protocols. She explained it simply, her voice steadier now, the engineer in her surfacing through the fear. Buried deep in the system was a back door, invisible to standard audits, one that allowed identification safeguards to be bypassed entirely. It could turn allies into enemies with a line of code. When she discovered it, she thought it was sabotage, a mistake. When she confronted Noah, she learned the truth. The flaw was intentional, sold quietly to buyers who paid more than any government contract ever would. Jack listened, his expression unreadable, but something old and dark stirred behind his eyes. He had seen what happened when systems failed, when decisions made far from the ground turned people into collateral. Emily told him she hadn't taken files out of greed or fear. She'd taken them because if she didn't, no one else would stand in the way. The proof, source code fragments, transaction logs, encrypted correspondence, was hidden in a solid-state drive locked inside a public storage locker at Pioneer Square Station. She'd chosen the place because it was crowded, anonymous, easy to disappear into. Or so she'd thought. Jack knew what the decision meant before she finished speaking. If they went there together, he would no longer be a man offering shelter for a night. He would be part of the problem Noah wanted erased. Jack exhaled slowly and reached for his jacket. "We go now," he said, "before daylight." They left the garage separately, spacing themselves by half a block, Jack leading with Rex at heel, Emily following when the street cleared. Pioneer Square at night carried its own tension. Old brick buildings looming close, the sidewalks uneven, slick with age and moisture. The station entrance yawned open beneath a flickering light, stairs descending into the earth. The air smelled of damp stone and stale metal. Rex slowed as they approached, his ears angling forward, nose lifting. Jack felt the warning travel up the leash like a pulse. Inside, the station was quieter than Emily had hoped. A few figures lingered near the ticket machines, faces hidden beneath hoods, movements slow and unhurried. The lockers were along the far wall, rows of dented steel doors under harsh fluorescent lights. Emily's hands shook as she walked, not from fear alone but from the weight of what she was about to reclaim. Jack positioned himself between her and the rest of the room, pretending to study a transit map while his eyes tracked reflections in the glass. That was when Rex barked. It wasn't loud at first, just a sharp, sudden sound that echoed off tile and made several heads turn. Jack saw the men before he saw the threat. Two figures near the stairwell straightened at the sound, their attention snapping toward Rex and then to Emily. One was tall and narrow, with a shaved head that gleamed under the lights, his jaw angular and clean-shaven, eyes too focused for a commuter. The other was stockier, mid-30s, with a thick neck and a patchy beard, his shoulders squared as if bracing for impact. They moved in sync, not rushing, not hesitating. Jack acted without thinking. He stepped backward into a maintenance cart parked near the wall and shoved it hard, metal clanging as tools spilled across the floor in a chaotic crash. The noise drew attention instantly, heads turning, confusion rippling outward. Rex barked again, louder this time, his body tense, tail low but steady, a warning meant to disrupt, not attack. For a few precious seconds the men hesitated, recalculating. "Now," Jack said, low and urgent. Emily ran to the lockers, fingers flying over the combination. The lock clicked open. Inside was a disposable coffee cup, crumpled slightly, unremarkable. She grabbed it, twisting the lid to reveal the small silver drive taped inside. Relief surged through her, sharp and almost painful. The hesitation broke. The stockier man lunged forward, shoving past the scattered tools. Jack stepped into his path, not swinging, not striking, just blocking. The impact knocked the breath from Jack's lungs as the man's shoulder slammed into his chest. Pain flared white-hot along Jack's ribs as he stumbled back, catching himself against the lockers. He felt something tear, sharp and deep, but he stayed on his feet. Rex moved then, not attacking, but positioning himself squarely between Jack and the man, teeth bared just enough to be seen, his growl low and vibrating. It was enough. The man froze, instinct overriding intent. "Emily!" Jack barked. She was already running. They didn't stop until they burst back onto the street, rain misting their faces, lungs burning. Jack's side throbbed with each breath, his shirt already warm and wet beneath his jacket. Rex stayed close, glancing back once, then forward again, focused on escape. Jack flagged down the first vehicle he recognized, a battered construction truck idling near a curb, its engine rattling unevenly. The driver leaned out the window, eyes widening. Mike Alvarez was in his late 50s, short and solid, his gray hair pulled into a low ponytail, skin weathered from years of outdoor labor. He'd worked alongside Jack on enough overnight jobs to know better than to ask unnecessary questions. "Get in," he said after one look at Jack's face. They climbed into the truck, Mike hitting the gas as soon as the doors slammed shut. The city blurred past in streaks of light and shadow. Jack slumped back against the seat, pressing a hand to his side, focusing on breathing. Emily clutched the coffee cup to her chest, the drive inside feeling heavier now that it was real. No one spoke until they were several miles away, the station far behind them. There was no sense of victory, no relief, only the raw understanding that they had crossed a line together and there was no stepping back. Jack closed his eyes briefly, pain pulsing through him, and thought of all the times evidence had existed without anyone willing to stand beside it. He opened his eyes and looked at Emily. "You're not alone anymore," he said, and meant it. The abandoned building stood a few blocks off the freight line, its brick facade cracked and tagged, windows boarded unevenly as if someone had tried and given up halfway. Jack led them through a side door pried open long ago, the hinges groaning softly as it swung inward. Inside, the air was stale and cold, carrying the layered smells of dust, mildew, and old smoke. A narrow staircase climbed into darkness. Rex took the lead, moving carefully, nails clicking faintly on concrete, his head low and alert. Emily followed, gripping the strap of her bag with one hand, the other hovering near the wall for balance. Jack brought up the rear, each step sending a jolt of pain through his side, his jaw clenched against it. They found a third-floor unit with a door that still closed and a mattress slumped against the far wall. It wasn't clean, but it was dry. Jack lowered himself onto the mattress with a sharp intake of breath, his knees buckling the moment the adrenaline let go. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold, his skin ashen under the grime. Emily knelt beside him, panic flaring again as she saw the dark stain spreading beneath his jacket. "I'm okay," Jack said automatically, though the words rang hollow even to him. Emily didn't argue. She peeled back the jacket with careful fingers and saw the damage. The skin split along his ribs, angry and swollen, the wound shallow but torn wide from impact. Jack's breath shuddered, a low groan slipping free despite his effort to contain it. Rex pressed close immediately, curling along Jack's side, his thick body radiating heat. The dog's ears flicked toward the door every few seconds, but his attention never fully left Jack. Emily swallowed hard. She had never done this before. Not really. She'd lived in a world of screens and systems where problems could be isolated, debugged, solved with enough logic and time. Blood was different. Pain was immediate and unforgiving. Her hands shook as she pulled supplies from the small kit Jack carried, the cheap gauze and antiseptic suddenly precious. She cleaned the wound as best she could, apologizing under her breath every time Jack hissed or flinched. He gripped the edge of the mattress, knuckles white, refusing to look at her, refusing to let himself be seen like this. "I'm sorry," Emily said again, her voice cracking. Jack shook his head weakly. "Don't," he muttered. "You're doing fine." The words steadied her more than any instruction could have. She wrapped the bandage tight enough to stop the bleeding, not so tight that it cut off his breath, and then sat back on her heels, exhaustion hitting her in a wave. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The building creaked around them as the night deepened, the distant rumble of trains vibrating faintly through the walls. Jack's fever set in after midnight. It came on fast, his skin burning beneath Emily's palm, his breathing shallow and uneven. He drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering fragments of sentences that made no sense until Emily realized they weren't meant for her at all. Names, places, half-commands. A man who had learned long ago to stay awake when sleep meant danger, now unable to keep his eyes open. Rex did not leave him. The dog shifted positions as needed, adjusting to Jack's restless movements, pressing closer when the shivering started, lifting his head at every unfamiliar sound. Emily stayed awake, too afraid to sleep, watching Jack's chest rise and fall, listening to the rain start again outside, tapping against the boarded windows like a reminder that the world hadn't paused for them. Sometime before dawn, the fever broke. Jack's breathing evened out, his face losing some of its strained tightness. Emily let herself sag against the wall, her head falling back as relief washed over her, heavy and almost painful. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding herself together until that moment. Morning arrived quietly, gray light filtering through the gaps in the boards. Jack woke with a dull ache radiating through his body, his mouth dry, his head pounding. He pushed himself up on one elbow, then stopped, dizzy. "Easy," Emily said, already at his side. She held a bottle of water out to him, her eyes shadowed by exhaustion but clear. "You scared me." Jack managed a weak huff of a laugh and took the bottle, drinking slowly. He glanced at the bandage on his side, then at Emily. "You did that?" She nodded. "I had help," she said, glancing down at Rex, who thumped his tail once against the floor in response. They sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of the night settling between them. Then Emily reached into her bag and pulled out the coffee cup, unwrapping the small silver solid-state drive inside. It looked innocuous, unremarkable. Jack had seen weapons that drew less attention. "I tried," Emily said quietly. "I ran a decryption test on my laptop before we left the garage. It won't open." Jack frowned. "Encrypted?" "Layered," she replied. The engineer was back now, the fear tempered by focus. Military-grade encryption, plus a secondary lock tied to a specific server environment. If I try to brute force it, it wipes itself. Noah didn't just plan for theft, he planned for betrayal. Jack closed his eyes briefly, absorbing that. So, what does that mean? It means the evidence is useless unless I can access his internal system, Emily said. The master keys are cached there. Without them, this, she held up the drive, is just a paperweight. The implication hung heavy in the room. Jack understood it without needing the technical details. There was no safe handoff, no quiet email to authorities. To make the truth real, they would have to walk straight into Noah Harrington's world. He's hosting an event tonight, Emily continued, her voice low. A launch gala. Press, investors, politicians. Security will be tight, but it'll also be distracted. It's the only window. Jack looked down at his hands, scarred and calloused, hands that had fixed wires and carried tools and once held a rifle he'd sworn never to touch again. His body protested even the thought of moving too fast, too far. He knew his limits better than anyone. He knew he wasn't built for another chase, another fight. Rex watched him closely, head tilted, as if sensing the shift inside him. I won't make it if it turns into a run, Jack said finally. Emily nodded. I know. Another silence fell, deeper than the last. Outside, the city woke up, distant traffic humming to life. Jack breathed through the pain, through the memory of all the times he had walked away because staying meant losing something he couldn't afford to lose. He thought of the garage, of the nights he slept there because it was easier than explaining his life to anyone else. He thought of Rex, abandoned once, still choosing loyalty every day. I'm not doing this because I think we'll win, Jack said at last. His voice was steady, even if his body wasn't. I'm doing it because if I walk away now, I won't recognize myself anymore. Emily's eyes filled again, but this time the tears didn't fall. She nodded, understanding the weight of what he was offering. Rex rose and moved to Jack's side, pressing his shoulder against Jack's knee, solid and sure. The choice was made. The Harrington Center rose from the waterfront like a polished promise, all glass and steel, its facade catching the last of the evening light and throwing it back at the city in controlled reflections. Limousines idled beneath a white canopy as guests stepped out in tailored suits and elegant dresses, laughter floating above the soft thrum of generators and the distant sound of waves. Jack Turner watched from across the street, leaning into the shadow of a concrete pillar, his tool bag slung low on one shoulder. The jacket he wore bore a faded logo from a local electrical subcontractor, the kind no one looked at twice. His beard was trimmed shorter than usual, his cap pulled low, and the tension in his body was hidden beneath the posture of a man who belonged wherever wires ran. Emily stood a few steps away, transformed not by glamour, but by intention. She wore a simple dark blazer over a plain blouse, hair pulled back into a tight knot that exposed the pale line of her neck. There was no makeup beyond what was needed to look unremarkable. Her eyes, however, were sharper than they had ever been, focused inward, steady. Rex waited with Mike Alvarez in the battered construction truck around the corner, the dog's head resting on the open window frame, ears forward, watching the entrance with patient intensity. Jack had insisted on it. Rex would only come in if things went wrong. They entered through the service corridor with the rest of the technical staff, Jack flashing a laminated badge he'd borrowed months ago and never returned. The hallway smelled of fresh paint and ozone, the hum of power running thick through the walls. Jack felt it like a second pulse, familiar and grounding. He moved with quiet confidence, nodding once to a security guard who barely glanced up. The guard was young, clean-shaven, shoulders squared in a way that suggested discipline without experience. Jack knew the type. He passed without incident. Inside, the gala bloomed into sound and light. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead, casting warm halos over clusters of guests. Waiters moved like currents between them, silver trays balanced with practiced ease. On a raised platform near the center of the hall, Noah Harrington spoke with a group of investors, his posture relaxed, his smile precise. He wore a charcoal suit that fit perfectly, his blonde hair swept back, not a strand out of place. Up close, he looked even more controlled, his pale eyes calculating as they flicked briefly over the room, assessing without appearing to do so. Emily peeled away toward the stairwell that led to the restricted floors, her steps measured, her breathing slow. Jack headed in the opposite direction, toward a bank of access panels he'd studied earlier that afternoon. He knelt, set down his bag, and opened the panel with the ease of long habit. Inside, color-coded cables hummed softly. He checked his watch, then pulled a small breaker tool from his bag. He didn't shut the power down completely. That would have been obvious, disruptive in the wrong way. Instead, he isolated a secondary lighting circuit feeding a quadrant of the building, enough to cause a ripple of confusion without triggering emergency protocols. When he flipped the breaker, the lights along the east wall flickered, dimmed, then went out. A murmur ran through the room. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Security shifted, attention drawn outward. Jack stood, replaced the panel, and melted back into the flow. Emily reached the server floor breathless but composed. The door recognized her credentials after a brief hesitation, a soft chime signaling entry. Inside, the room was cold and bright, rows of black server racks humming with contained power. She crossed to the central terminal, hands steady as she connected the solid-state drive. The screen blinked, lines of the code racing by. Decryption began. Behind her, the door slid open. Noah Harrington stepped inside, the smile gone from his face. Up close, the sharp angles of his features seemed harder, the calm more brittle. He closed the door behind him quietly. "You should have stayed gone, Emily," he said, his voice low, almost gentle. "You never understood the scale of what I was building." Emily turned slowly, keeping one hand on the console. "You were selling death," she said, "and calling it progress." Noah's eyes flicked to the screen, to the progress bar inching forward. His jaw tightened. He reached for the console controls, fingers moving to terminate the process. Before he could touch it, a deep growl filled the room. Rex stood in the doorway. The German shepherd's coat gleamed under the harsh lights, his body angled forward, legs braced. His ears were pinned back, teeth visible, not snapping, not lunging, just there, an unmovable presence. The sound he made was low and resonant, vibrating through the floor. Noah froze, instinct overriding calculation. He took a step back. "Call him off," Noah snapped, his composure cracking. Emily didn't move. "You always thought people would step aside," she said. "You never planned for someone to stay." The growl carried beyond the room, echoing into the hallway. Security voices rose outside, footsteps approaching. Noah glanced toward the door, panic flaring now, sharp and real. On the console, the progress bar hit 100%. A green confirmation flashed, followed by a prompt. "Broadcast ready." Emily pressed the key. Noah's voice filled the building, amplified through the sound system meant for speeches and celebrations. His earlier boasts, his admissions, the recorded calls and transaction logs Emily had embedded in the broadcast played out in cold, undeniable clarity. In the ballroom below, conversation died. Glasses were set down, faces turned toward the speakers in stunned silence. Security burst into the server room moments later, weapons lowered as they took in the scene. The shaking tech magnate backed against a rack, the woman at the console, the dog standing guard. Federal agents followed soon after, drawn by alerts triggered the moment the data went public. Noah Harrington was led away in cuffs, his suit rumpled, his face drained of color, his empire collapsing in real time. Jack didn't stay to watch. He slipped out through the service corridor while the building erupted into controlled chaos, reporters pressing against barricades outside, lights flashing. He crossed the street with Rex at his side, blending into the night as easily as he had entered it. No one stopped him. No one thanked him. Weeks later, the city looked different under clear skies. Jack stood in the yard behind a modest maintenance depot, adjusting the straps on his new tool belt. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, union-backed, with regular hours and benefits he hadn't had in years. Rex lay nearby, a bright orange rescue vest draped over his broad shoulders, tail thumping lazily against the grass as a small crowd of co-workers looked on, smiling. Someone had taken a photo for the bulletin board. Jack pretended not to notice. Emily's message came that evening, a simple notification lighting up his phone. He sat on the edge of his bed to read it. "You didn't save me with strength," it said. "You saved me by staying. I won't forget that." Jack set the phone down and looked at Rex, who lifted his head and met Jack's gaze, calm and certain. Outside, the city hummed on, imperfect but still standing. For the first time in a long while, Jack felt no urge to turn away. Sometimes miracles don't come with thunder or fire from the sky. They come quietly, wearing work boots instead of armor. They come as someone who is tired, wounded, and has every reason to walk away, but stays. Jack was not rich. He was not powerful. He did not have influence, weapons, or applause. What he had was a heart that refused to turn its back when God placed someone in front of him. And maybe that is how God still works today. In our daily lives, we wait for miracles to change our circumstances, to fix our finances, heal our pain, solve our problems overnight. But often, God's miracle is not the removal of the storm. It is the presence of someone who walks with us through it, a hand that does not let go, a soul that stays when leaving would be easier. You may feel ordinary. You may feel broken. You may feel like your life is small or unnoticed. But remember this: God has always used ordinary people to do extraordinary good. Not because they were strong, but because they were willing. If this story touched your heart, it's because somewhere inside you recognize that truth. And maybe, just maybe, you are meant to be that quiet miracle for someone else. If you believe that God still protects, still guides, still uses compassion to heal the world, please share this story with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, or simply type Amen if you believe that light always finds a way through darkness. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story that reminds you of your own strength, your own purpose, and your own worth. May God bless you and your family. May He surround you with people who stay. May He give you courage when the road is hard, and peace when your heart is tired. And may you always remember, sometimes the miracle is not being saved. It is becoming the reason someone else survives. Amen.